Hi, Paul Thompson here. Today we're going to look at 10 ways that you can use the harp to change the colour of your orchestration. So first of all, I'm sure we're all familiar with the harp, but here it is. Now the harp has a couple of different playing styles. That's called normal. You've got près de la table, which is the kind of crispier, like a slightly more aggressive sound. You've got harmonics. And then the other one that we're going to be using today is bisbigliando, which is that kind of two-handed trem. So first up, harp and celeste. Now, as luck would have it, we have one here which we recorded earlier for the Bernard Herrmann Composer Toolkit. Now you've got, there's a kind of, a genuinely recorded staccato for that as well. The thing that this does for you is it kind of, it changes the sound of the celeste. So the celeste, which we typically kind of think of as being childlike, becomes a slightly crisper sound when you add the harp to it. And also, it doesn't have the kind of sweetness that you usually associate with the harp. So putting these two instruments together actually changes them into a third thing, which is completely different from either of the individual things. There's some quite interesting chords here as well. Now, admittedly, spreading the chords is going to bring some of that kind of sparkliness back into things. But I think that the actual combination of the instruments is really an interesting one. It's something that Bernard Herrmann used, and he has a second combination. So this is number 2, is the harp and vibraphone. Now again, let's start with our longs. You can do a kind of staccato. And it has that beautiful, if I change the balance so you can just hear that, those kind of slightly differently balanced, more harp there, or if we pull down the harp close and push up the vibraphone close, you can hear how you can alter the balance in here. Now this one, you could use in two different ways. So used orchestrally, it just becomes a really interesting, slightly moving colour that you can sit in the percussion section, and it becomes that kind of, again, it becomes that kind of hybrid sound that's not quite one thing or the other, and it's really useful in the back. Or you can use it to give you that real kind of 50s, and if I actually load up the a couple of the chords, you can hear that this now becomes... that really kind of takes us into a slightly different territory. And for scoring, it's again a really useful colour. You could go full 50s, and so you can really kind of go into the kind of gumshoe world, that real kind of 50s mystery, detective kind of sound. And then finally, we can use a kind of bowed where we're bowing the vibraphone, and then you would use this like a kind of swell into a note. So you bow into the note like this. So it's a slightly more unusual sound, and potentially, it's one of those things that you might use for an effect, but obviously you have to, there's only one bow, unless you have a bow in each hand. I suppose you could play two notes at the same time. So slightly more limited use, but another great sound. Okay, so for number 3, we are using the BBC Symphony Orchestra. I've got the harp sustained loaded up for those sustained notes, and I've got the cello legato. And I'm going to play a little pattern which I'm duplicating. I've just got both tracks in record. I would play these in separately if I was doing this for real, but just to demonstrate, things like this work really well. So you get the idea. It's using, we're basically just playing exactly the same thing, but you're kind of pointing up the start of the note of the cello melody, and having that without the harp. If I just mute that harp, perfectly lovely. But with the harp, it just gives you a really nice colour. It points up the start of the note, and when you have the other strings, you know, kind of doing their thing, it just helps draw your attention to the cello line, whether that's a melody or whether it's just one of those parts that's kind of bringing out the chords, arpeggiating the chords. It's a trick that works really well. So for our fourth tip, we're using the piano and the harp. Now, I'm using the room mics of the Hans Zimmer piano to get that kind of set back in the studio kind of feel. And I will also turn off the close mic of the harp. So we're using the kind of tree-ish, you know, everything back from there. And in combination, they really sound beautiful. You can do this kind of short thing as well. And it's doing that thing again. We're making a new hybrid instrument. But the beauty of this is that it gives you a really nice kind of punchy sound that isn't just the piano playing loudly. It's that it gives a point to the start of the piano. It's got the richness of the harp in there as well, and it's got those two different colours which blend incredibly well together and really well for those kind of sweeps. Here's a slightly different take on that. And then just leave it to ring out beautifully. Sounds absolutely fabulous. One of my favourite combinations, that one. Now 5 comes in 2 parts. It's taking the last combination, but it's adding some woodwind to it. And I'm going to start off with just the flutes. So we're adding 2 flutes to the combination that we just had. You get the idea. The flute is adding a beautiful softness and length to the timbre, and it becomes like a sustaining instrument that actually has a kind of attack that kind of dies away. It's a really nice sound. And we can make that stronger sound by adding in the clarinets. So that kind of fills out the underneath a little bit and makes it slightly less kind of fragile sounding. Next up, for number 6, we have a slightly unusual combination. We're using the pizzicato cellos, we're using the harp, playing the sustained plucks, and then we're using the timpani. Now I've gone back to the BBC Symphony Orchestra for this. I've transposed the timps by 12, which gets us in the same pitch range. It actually moves the timps down an octave on the keyboard. A really fantastic sound. We can also use the damped sound of the harp. And we can actually use the damped sound of the timpani as well. So a really useful sound. One alternative you might try is to transpose the harp up an octave so it sits above, and this will help it sing out slightly more. It's a great, really characterful, slightly cheeky combination of instruments, but one that you can really make work very beautifully. In fact, we could almost even do something really different. We could use the bisbigliando. We could even put the rolls on the timpani and take the harp up the octave in order to, again, get it to sing out above the top. So for number 7, we're taking the flute and piccolo combination, or 2 flutes with a piccolo an octave up. In this case, it's Abbey Road 1 Wondrous Flutes. And then I'm adding the harp to that, and we're going to be playing staccato and just doing the little kind of, I'll show you. Now we can change the balance here. Let's add a little bit more harp. If we want to change the kind of sound character, we can use that Près de la Table sound on the harp, which gives us that slightly crisper, more aggressive edge. Or we can use the harmonics. Which gives that slightly hollower sound. It's a slightly weaker sound on the harp, but it still sounds really nice in combination with the flutes and piccolo. Number 8, taking us back into the percussion section to match up the harp with the glockenspiel. So you get the idea. That's really, really useful for those kind of magical things. And again, all of these things are altering the colour of the kind of instrument that you might typically use for that. So whether you would just use the harp for that or not, in fact, let's turn the glock off and just listen to the harp. And if we listen to the glock on its own, both fine options, but when you put them together, you get something that really is more than the sum of the parts. And we can also take the harp up the octave for a different colour again. For number 9, we're combining high strings trem with the harp trem, and this works really well at low dynamics. So a really great sound. It's just about getting the balance right. And obviously if the strings are too loud, if the strings are playing out, then they'll obliterate the harp, the texture of the harp and what's going on there. Last but not least, another slight curio, but a combination that I really love. It's the harp playing staccato with the strings col legno. In this case, I'm using the violas because I want to concentrate on that middle texture. And if you, this is only 4 violas in the Spitfire chamber strings, but you could imagine that if you had an 8-player section and you were divising, you might do something like this. So there's 10 quick ideas on how you can use the harp to change your orchestration. I hope that some of that is inspirational and useful. There's obviously lots and lots of things you can do. If you come up with any great combinations, post them in the comments below so we can check them out. But ways of using the harp that's not just the standard kind of glissandos up and down and all that kind of stuff. Using them for these kind of really interesting coloured, pointed sounds and kind of hybrid sounds that really give you something a little bit unexpected and something that maybe your audience can't quite work out what they're hearing. Hope that's helpful. Thanks very much for watching. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye bye.